The Boston Red Sox fell to the bottom of the standings in the American League East in 2022. This offseason gave Boston some big departures and even bigger questions about the future of this ball club. Is there enough on the squad to get them out of the basement in the deepest division in baseball? Let's talk about it here on a Route Report edition of the OK Baseball Podcast. And hello, everyone. Welcome into another episode of the Route Report here at the OK Baseball Podcast. We're continuing on with our team previews, third year in a row we're doing this. And joining me back for another year, Lauren Willand. How you doing? Welcome back to the show. We're talking Boston Red Sox today, co-host of Locked On Red Sox. Lauren, welcome in.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back. Hopefully it's going to be a little bit better than last year, but can't tell that just yet.
Yeah, well, you're talking about the Boston Red Sox 2022, not the episode last year, because the episode
Correct.
was fantastic between you and I. Had a great time, and I'm so happy that you're back. Make sure you check out Locked On Red Sox. They had a fantastic episode that came out on Monday. John Morosi from MLB Network came on talking World Baseball Classic. It was just really enjoyed that episode, so definitely check them out. We'll make sure we talk about that at the end of the show as well. But let's dig right into it, Lauren, because I think Boston is such an interesting team this year, and especially one of the deepest divisions, as I mentioned in the intro here, in all of baseball. You could make the argument, and I don't think anybody would really fight against you, maybe some NL East fans, that the American League East is the toughest division in all of baseball. Last year, 78 and 84. This is the first time in a long time we saw them at the bottom of the barrel in the American League East. Take me back, as someone who follows this team, covers this team, your perspective on this ball club last season.
Oh man, it was a disaster. And it was weird. It was like you couldn't pinpoint what was going wrong and when this all started. And then in June, we saw a little bit of hope there where this team was very, very good. It seemed like they could not lose in June, and they just couldn't carry that momentum. So it was just a very off season. It was just a really weird season. They were much better than they showed, or they should have been much better, I should say. Yes, they dealt with injuries, but what team doesn't? I mean, at one point they did have like 13 or 14 people on the injured list, so that certainly doesn't help. But it's, finally turning that page, because it was a long 162 games last year of just, once the pitching was good, the offense couldn't get it, the offense clicked, and the pitching couldn't get it. It was just messy. It was a very messy season.
Yeah, just seeing them a few years removed from the American League Championship Series, from the World Series, going from the top to the bottom really quick, I'm sure is definitely not a fun thing to happen for Boston fans and this Red Sox squad. But then you move into the offseason, Lauren, and I'm sure that got even worse. The news got even worse for you when guys like Xander Bogaerts goes to San Diego after a huge contract, 11 years, $280 million. You see other players, Nathan Eovaldi, take off, move on. Michael Wacha also going to the Padres. This team is taking obviously a different approach in this season. Now, where they're sitting right now, currently fifth in the American League, looking at last year's standings, I'm not sure a guy like Xander Bogaerts was going to get that $280 million. I'm sure you can probably look into that a little farther, but a lot of departures on this team from heading to the World Series just a few years back. What's your takeaway from this crazy offseason we've seen from Boston thus far?
For me, it's what is the direction of this team, because it feels like there is not a direction. And I say that as they haven't lost it in regulation in spring training. There's a few ties they've had, and it sounds weird to say that, but when you look at the moves they've made, and yes, they filled holes that needed to be filled, but you let Xander Bogaerts walk. Why didn't you trade him then? If you thought this was going to be the case all the time, why didn't you trade Eovaldi Martinez at the trade deadline? So there's still a lot of questions that we'll probably never have answers to. But this team, yes, it did get a little bit older. I think the average age is still the same as it was last year. But you look at, the Justin Turners, the Adam Duvals, the Corey Kluber. This team would have been sick 5 years ago, right? And all those guys in their prime. Like, this is a team where I'm like, 5 years ago, yes. But you look at all the question marks, and you look at the pitching and the offense, and everything seems to be going well in spring training right now. Yes, it's early. Yes, it's spring training. Some guys are already off to the WBC. Some are going later this week. So you wonder if that will kind of mess with the chemistry. But I don't know, did they need a bunch of new faces in here to just kind of get a fresh start on a new season? So it's very weird, and I'm loving that the success they're having in spring training, but it won't matter if they can't do that in the regular season.
What is the, I guess, universal feeling, probably from your comment section on Locked On Red Sox, of the fans listening to the show, or just as Red Sox fans in general? Is there optimism for 2023 with this squad?
There is, and I think it's pretty split. So I think people are either like, this team is just going to be 2022 all over again, and people are like, no, like this is actually a good roster. And I've said that there is a lot of potential there for this Red Sox team to be competitive and for them to be good. Now, when I say good, does that mean better than the Yankees, the Blue Jays, the Rays? I don't know. They got better around the Red Sox. The Yankees, they signed Aaron Judge. They kept their talent long term. So it makes you wonder if they can keep up. They struggled really, really bad against the AL East last year. So it's pretty split. I think it's pretty evenly split, honestly. I mean, we have one person who comments on like every Locked On Red Sox YouTube video, just being like, this team's going to be good. And I was like, I need that energy. Like, yes, every day, like this is, and I'm glad, because I wasn't feeling very optimistic. And now that we've seen some players, Chris Sale looks really good, even though it was only one start, but I'll take that. And everyone he kind of seems like they're playing with a chip on their shoulder. And when a player comes in, or a team as a whole comes in and they're angry, Alex Cora certainly is not happy with how last season went. So I'm like cautiously optimistic. I'm not going to sit here and say this team is trash, they suck, and it's going to be a terrible season, but I'm also not like World Series 2023. So it's a cautious optimism going into the season. It's a confusing kind of optimism too, because this team, again, spring training, yes, games don't matter, but they look pretty good in spring training. And you're like, what's going on? Is this going to be the team we see when games actually start to count?
I want to get into spring training with you, because they are looking pretty good out there down in Florida. We're seeing some interesting things. And you brought up Chris Sale. He mentioned after his start today that he felt good out there. What are some other position battles that maybe you are paying attention to this spring, and maybe some certain players like Chris Sale that you are knowing that, man, this is a make or break season, make or break spring for these players, for maybe the opening roster or just the 40-man?
I was looking big into Jorge Alfaro, but now with Connor Wong's injury, I mean, Alfaro was my guy to watch for all spring training. And now that Connor Wong has his hamstring injury, it's a grade 1 strain. So it's the least serious. It's probably the best news they could have had in terms of strains, but he'll probably will not be ready for opening day. So I feel like that kind of slots Alfaro into that position, but it's still a very interesting position battle, as you can call it. But, Reese McGuire and now Jorge Alfaro, and Alex Cora said at the beginning of spring training, he wasn't opposed to carrying 3 catchers, and because of Alfaro's versatility, but now it seems like that's going to be McGuire and Alfaro. But can Alfaro kind of make the case to not even be the number 1 catcher, but maybe the guy that they go to gets a little bit more games? I think it'll be a fairly even 50-50 split, but now that Wong's injured, I think that kind of takes the competition out of it. But then you have Raimel Tapia, who all of a sudden is looking like he should not have been signed to a minor league deal and should have had the major league deal already. But you have him, you have Jarren Duran, and this is huge spring training for Jarren Duran. And you thought maybe he could just kind of slide in with the injuries and Trevor Story being out and Kike Hernandez moving out of the outfield for the time being. But Alex Cora said he's taking the 26 best players out of spring training. And I think that there's going to be a lot of tough decisions. And this is going to sound bad because I do like the guy, but Bobby Delbeck, I don't think is really in a position battle. I think that this is, unfortunately, it's his spring training to just showcase what he can do and maybe be a potential trade chip, whether that's beginning of the season or at the deadline, which is probably the last thing he wants to do. I think he wants to be here, but I think now with, Casas at first base, Devers at third base, kind of where does Bobby Delbeck fit in? But, with the World Baseball Classic now, this is a good opportunity for him to showcase that. But I think he's the biggest odd man out, on the outside looking in there. But I really think it's like Tapia and Duran, now that Wong is injured, looking at or fighting for the outfield spot, because I mean, we saw Duran last year, his struggles with defense and offense as well. And it's just become, well, he's fast. Okay, great. He has speed. Great. That's not going to do it at the major league level. So this is a big offseason or big spring training for him. He's also going to the World Baseball Classic. So you wonder if Tapia is going to, he's going to say, this is my time to shine. I want on this roster. Not that he's trying to kick Duran out or anything, but you taking the 26 best players, you're going to put your best product on the field.
Looking at the infield, and you just mentioned the corners with Casas at first. A lot of people have him as possible odds to be the American League Rookie of the Year. Some people have him in the odds there. He's not the favorite, but he's up there. And then, of course, Rafael Devers, who signs the extension to be the face of the franchise moving forward after letting go of Mookie Betts, letting go of Xander Bogaerts. They decided to keep with Devers. Before I move into the rest of the infield, I guess I have to ask this question. Do you think Devers was the right one to do this? Do you think that they had to do that? A lot of people across the network say they were stuck. They had to sign Devers for the sake of the fans. Do you think that was where that direction was, or do you think this is the right choice for Boston?
I think it's both. I think it was the right decision, and I think that they felt the pressure of losing Bogaerts and losing other homegrown talent throughout, not just dating back to Betts, but Lester and then Mo Vaughn. Even you can argue Mo Vaughn in the 90s.
Right.
So you just they know who they've lost, and I think the outrage over Bogaerts, especially when you're being told he's the number one priority, then you see all the reports that he wanted to be here, but it was the Red Sox who weren't budging on the term. And you know what? That's fine. That's a long time to commit to a 30-year-old. And I obviously wanted Bogaerts here, but I think they saw this and they're like, we have to sign Devers. And like I said, it was the right move. I think absolutely they should have locked him up before either his stock got too high or it turned into another Bogaerts or Mookie Betts situation where you either trade him for prospects that some of them have already left the organization, or you end up just keeping him too long that he leaves in free agency for absolutely nothing. But, I think Devers is all of a sudden the face of the franchise here. I think that he's fantastic at what he does. I think, like I said, this was the right decision. And I do think that they looked at this and they said, we can't lose Devers too. And if there was any inkling that it was going to get to a point where it was going to be a Bogaerts thing, they were going to have to trade him. Because if this happened 2 years in a row and the fourth time in like 3 years, I think that it would have been something I cannot say on air. It just would have been awful for Red Sox fans, for the organization, for the front office. But yes, like I said, I do think it was a little bit of both, but I think that they made the right decision because you kind of look at who else is there. It's not Bobby Delbeck who's in the system now, who's in Worcester. Devers is your guy. Let's start keeping people who mean a lot to the organization, who are talented, and maybe don't come around, every 2 years.
It seems like a lot of teams in the American League East are building their core. It sounds like that is the way that Boston needs to build their core, especially with the players in the corner. Hopefully Casas can step up. But the middle of the infield, where a lot of teams look and build their value in second base and shortstop, right now it seems like there's some sort of still question marks for the Boston Red Sox on if they have found their pieces of the future or maybe just certain stopgaps for 2023. Take me through that. What's going on with second and shortstop?
Oh, what a strange turn of events with Trevor Story getting hurt. So, he was supposed to be the shortstop and you would keep Kike Hernandez in center field, and he underwent the surgery and we still don't have a definitive timeline. And I think that's because the surgery is not a very common one. It kind of reminds me of when Stephen Wright and Dustin Pedroia had the knee procedure and there was never really timelines. Very different injury, but hopefully he can come back this year and just go get back to shortstop. But Kike he has some experience at short. I think it's under 80 games, but there is a little bit of experience there. And he's just an incredible athlete. I mean, the Red Sox signed him to be their second baseman and then threw him in center field. And he looked like he'd play there his entire life. He could be a Gold Glover out there. And last year, obviously, he was dealing with an injury, so he didn't look as good as he did the year prior. But I don't think there's any doubt that he's going to be okay. He's going to be more than okay. We've seen it in spring training that his range is good. His athleticism is just insane. And I think he's someone, too, who knows that there's a lot of pressure, not necessarily on him, but on that position, because this was Xander Bogaerts' position. And then there was already talk about when Trevor Story signed, they're like, oh, this clearly is Xander Bogaerts' backup. And then, Story goes down. And it's a whole, now you have to plug and play all over again and was second. And that's I think the biggest question mark in the infield, because Christian Arroyo we know that he can be serviceable, but can he stay healthy for a full season? He's never really been a full-time player, and his role all of a sudden is a lot bigger than it has been. And he's up to the task. Of course he is, but can he stay healthy? Can he do this for 100 games, 120 games? That's going to be the biggest thing here, because if he gets hurt, then what? Then what are we doing? Are we going to put Kike at second? Are we going to slide over people who maybe don't have experience in those positions? Because we saw that a lot last year, and we saw that a lot in 2021, and it did not work out at all. Christian Arroyo played first base and nearly tore his hamstring or tore his groin clean off in his first time at first base. And that's a completely different position. That's a very tough, every position is tough in baseball, but I think Christian Arroyo is a bigger question mark than the shortstop position, as I just have a lot of faith in Kike just being just someone who can adapt very easily. And like I said, just an incredible athlete. And with the experience already at short, I don't think that's going to be any sort of question mark. But second base, I'm a little worried. I'm not going to lie. I know Christian Arroyo can do it, but can he do it for a full season? That's where I'm like, oh God, I really hope there's a good plan B in place.
Speaking of Kike Hernandez, at the beginning of spring training, he had some choice words, I guess, for the direction of the Red Sox. And with the departure of some of these players that have been there for such time, JD Martinez, Xander Bogaerts, it seems like the Red Sox are still looking for that voice in the locker room. Is Kike going to be that guy?
Oh, 100%. I think that he's already is. I think that he's a leader in his own right. And I think Justin Turner as well, once he recovers and gets back, I think he'll be a big voice. He's a veteran, and World Series championships don't make you leaders, and, postseason success doesn't make you leaders. But I just think that these two know knows kind of what the team needs to do in order to kind of, right the ship and kind of get back on track. And Kike, he's outspoken. He knows, and he knows what it takes, and he knows that he was promised this team would be better. Come hell or high water, this team is going to be better, even if it's one win more than last year. He's going to he'd single-handedly do it if he could. And I think that people respect him. Alex Cora loves him. And I think that just being able to be, he's able to be himself, and people, like I said, they respect him, they listen to him, and they all want to be the best player. You don't want to make players like Kike mad, because then you don't want to hear him yelling at you like Chris Sale. You don't want to make Chris Sale mad, but he 100% can do it. I think he has done it, not just with the Dodgers, but with the Red Sox as well. And now, especially with Bogaerts gone and even Martinez and Eovaldi, then that leadership void is a lot bigger than it was last year. And Kike can do it. He's just like, I just think he's the guy to be able to take the team kind of under his ropes, under his belt or whatever, and just make them a better team game in and game out.
That's a good thing to have, especially at a big value position like shortstop. Some optimism here that I've seen so far at the beginning of spring training. And I know that a lot of people will go back to always, when you hear this guy's name, you think of the Mookie Betts trade, and that's Alex Verdugo. Well, in the outfield this year, he's stated that his shoulder feels really good. And that's got to give you some optimistic views about how Verdugo can be for going into 2023. His performance hasn't been the best when you look back, and obviously, and it's unfortunate that you always do it, but compare it to the Mookie Betts trade. Now, especially since Jeter Downs was DFA'd this season, a lot of people are going to really point at Alex Verdugo this season. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think that for the end of time, he's going to have all this pressure on him because he was the centerpiece. He was that MLB ready player in the Mookie Betts trade. And listen, he may never be an all-star caliber player, but if he can be serviceable, I'm fine with that. And last year, I think his brother wrote on Twitter that he had a broken big toe to start the season. And then he had the shoulder issue. So he was just kind of a mess in terms of injuries. And I think he's somebody who has a chip on his shoulder as well. He wants to prove that, no, I'm not Mookie Betts, but I can be exactly what this team needs. And last year we kind of saw it. We saw him be the voice of reason with Jarren Duran when he was getting into it with Kansas City Royal fans. We saw him just kind of, take him away, get him to calm down. And there's so much good energy with Alex Verdugo as well, where I feel like even though there's a lot of pressure on him, he's just like, let the good times roll. We're going to do it. I'm going to go out there. And he's always going to give his 110%. There's never any doubt about that. And we saw that even though he was injured, we still saw him do everything he could. So I'm excited to see. I think this is a big season for him. It's a big season for a lot of players on the Red Sox, but especially Verdugo. Like I said, he doesn't have to be an all-star caliber player. Could he be? Sure, but he doesn't have to be. He just has to be good enough, and no one is going to be Mookie Betts. And when you're traded for someone of that caliber like Mookie Betts, there's always going to be that comparison. But I think that it just needs to get out of people's heads. He's not Mookie, and yes, he's here to kind of replace Mookie, but he can do it in other ways. He can be a leader. He can be a really good outfielder and a really good offensive power bat in this lineup.
I'm hoping that we can finally close the book on that story
of
the Mookie Betts trade. Maybe some good performance by him in 2023 will help us do that. Let's go into the rotation here, because I think there's a lot of fun storylines in this as well. Obviously, Chris Sale, him coming back. We saw some positive news in spring training today about that. Then you go ahead and sign another old timer. Corey Kluber, I think, has played for every American League East team now. It seems like he's played for everyone. I'm not sure if that's the case. Then you guys have other guys like Nick Pivetta, Tanner Hook, and then it kind of goes into what's next for this squad. There's still some storylines, I think, that are yet to be started for this rotation of the Red Sox, but obviously I know you're going to take me through it. Take me through your thoughts on the 2023 Boston Red Sox rotation.
I know that there's a lot of pitchers looking for a starting spot on this rotation, and I don't really think there's any guaranteed locks. I mean, yes, Chris Sale, yes, probably Corey Kluber, but even Pivetta, you wonder if they'll use him as a longer relief guy. And now with Brian Bayo and Garrett Whitlock dealing with injuries and not being ready for opening day, then it makes you wonder, are they going to come back and be starters? Are they going to be in the bullpen? They seem pretty hell-bent on making Whitlock a starter, but I do wonder if this recovery from hip surgery being a little bit longer than they expected, if that kind of changes their mind. But I just hope whatever the plan is with Whitlock, they just stick right to it. But Tanner Houck, the big thing with him was that he didn't have a third pitch, and that made him a liability as a starter because he needed that third pitch, and he's been working on it. And it looked really good in the spring training start. And his slider is just still filthy as ever. It looks really, really good. And batters just have a very difficult time with him. If he can really gain confidence in that third pitch, I think he'll certainly get a spot in this rotation. But I mean, you're looking at, I'd say, Sale. I do think Pivetta will ultimately be in the rotation. Sale, Pivetta, Corey Kluber, Tanner Houck, and then the fifth spot I thought was going to go to Brian Bayo. So now, like, that spot, it's up for grabs. I mean, I think any of those spots are up for grabs, minus Chris Sale's and Corey Kluber's. But then you have James Paxton, who probably also will not be ready for opening day, and you just have no idea what you're going to get from him. He's a real wild card here because I feel like Nick Pivetta, that he's probably going to start every single game for you. He's not going to miss a start like he did last year. He's going to give you durability, reliability. He'll probably give you 6 or 7 innings, but it'll either be 6 really good innings or 6 really not good innings. So with him, he's kind of a wild card, but I feel like you always know it's going to be one or the other kind of wild cards. But with Paxton, you just have no clue. He hasn't stayed healthy. He unfortunately got shut down last year after a lat tear, and then he's got a hamstring issue right now. So it's fun to watch, but I'm also like, there's so much good there with James Paxton, because when he's been healthy, he's been really good, and he could add a lot to this rotation. But how long it's been since he's pitched in a game, it makes you start to wonder, like, does he even have a spot on this rotation? Are they just going to stash him in the bullpen as well? And it just seems like Ryan Brazier is always going to be part of this Red Sox team. And good for him, because he looked awful last year and until September. He looked really good in September, but somehow he avoided DFA'd and roster cuts. And he's just, if he can do exactly what he did in September and make that kind of a stable thing, okay, I will eat all of my words and take back every mean thing I've ever said about him. But, I say there's no guarantees, but whatever Ryan Brazier's doing, it's guaranteeing him a spot on this rotation, or not in the rotation, in the bullpen.
Yeah, I mean, I applaud your optimism about this team so far, because just like you mentioned last year with all the injuries, it's already starting to take shape right now. Hopefully that ends now. But we're seeing, as you mentioned, with Wong, with Story, and obviously waiting on Paxton, Whitlock. Hopefully the injury doesn't get as bad as 2022. You mentioned a little bit about Brazier and the bullpen. It looks like now you're going to be anchored by a couple new free agents, Kenley Jansen, Chris Martin. Kenley Jansen's been in the news lately about him trying to adjust to the pitch clock because he was the slowest pitcher in all of baseball last season. Right. So with that being said, with this bullpen, I'd like to get your thoughts. What do you think about the new pitch clock, and what do you think about your new anchor in the bullpen?
I love the pitch clock. I think that in the minor leagues last year, in the beginning, there was a lot of violations, and it was just guys getting used to it. And I think that's what's going to happen this year as well. There'll be people who have to adjust. People like Kenley Jansen need to really adjust. And he said that, he's not going to the World Baseball Classic because he just wants to focus on just being a solid player for this team. And I applaud that. It's got to be a tough decision to not go represent your country in a very, very fun baseball tournament that hasn't been played in 6 years. But I like the pitch clock. It obviously works. And I don't think it takes away from the quality or the product of the game on the field. Maybe I'll feel different once I'm watching MLB games full time with the pitch clock. But in spring training so far, I've liked what I've seen. The product is good. I think it adds a bit more strategy to batters and pitchers. And when there's more strategy, it's always a good time. But so I love the pitch clock and the bullpen, the Red Sox bullpen. I think they get like an A for the offseason because they bolstered it, and they have a closer now. They not had a closer since Craig Kimbrell left the team, and they got people who are reliable. They're still in maybe not so much. It depends with Tanner Houck, but they don't really have a longer inning relief guy. And I think that maybe Chris Martin, even Joely Rodriguez, I think those guys could handle it. But that's why when I think, Garrett Whitlock, that would be a perfect role for him. Or even Tanner Houck. He was pretty good before he got hurt last year in that kind of role. And I do think Brian Bayo was good in that when they had him do that last year. But I just think that guy's a starter. I think he's going to be a stud of a starter. Maybe not necessarily an ace, but he's going to be very, very good. And I don't want him being in the bullpen kind of back and forth, like derail his career. I'm scarred by Daniel Bard when the Red Sox were going back and forth with him. But I do like this bullpen. But it just becomes a question of, is the offense going to do enough in order for them to do their jobs? Because the games they were losing last year, they couldn't even get to a closer. So I don't want Kenley Jansen's first year in Boston to go completely to waste because they can't use him in the situations he was brought in for. But if they keep playing how they are, they're winning games 7-1. Yes, it's spring training, but then they won't need him in that situation either. But I'd rather that than the other option. But I like the bullpen. And even with Ryan Brazier, like I said, if he can be what he was in September, that's a solid pitcher and a reliable guy you have in there. And maybe they're thinking we won't need to use him as much now that we have actual guys who can do these kinds of jobs, higher leverage situations. But I really do like the bullpen. I think that's probably one of the areas of this team that doesn't have a ton of question marks surrounding it.
Gotta love that. One of my favorite things that I like to do when we start these team previews, especially when I have a returning guest on, Lauren, is go back to last year's episode and just listen to it and see how you felt about it. Well, and the prospect mind, we asked you at the end of this episode, what are some of the prospects that you're really interested in? Who should we pay attention to? You screamed Duran. You said Duran's how fast he was, how amazing he was. Now we've talked about how he's already going to have a tough spring. This is a make or break kind of year, possibly, for Duran. What are some other prospects that are on your mind coming into 2023? Maybe that we can pay attention to in spring, or just some that we could pay attention to this season, as MLB TV is giving the minor league package away for free. So I'm encouraging everyone to watch minor league baseball this year.
Yes, 100%. It's a lot of fun to watch these young guys kind of fight for their future, really. But Brian Mata, I think that this is the year. Alex Cora said we'll see him at some point. I'm assuming that means a September call-up, but that is a guy to certainly watch for. He's had all this hype around him. He's had some, he's had his injury issues. He's had Tommy John, but he is someone that I am just 100% super excited to see what he can do and how he builds himself as a pitcher and hopefully a starting pitcher for this Red Sox team down the line. Let's not rush him. I don't want any more of this rushing prospects through the system stuff. And also Ceddanne Rafaela. He was fantastic for Portland last year. He was unbelievable. His athleticism is insane. He's so much fun to watch. I was able to go up to Portland, Maine last summer, and I was able to see him in person, and it was so much fun. I can't imagine he'll be in Worcester. He'll be in Worcester to start the season, but I feel like if there's an opening for him on this team, that he'll be a quick call up. But again, same with Mata. I don't want anything rushed. but those two guys, I think that are going to be on the radars of a lot of people, especially now we're getting to our first look at Mata in what seems like forever. And there's always been hype around Mata. It's Mata, Mata, Mata. We finally get to see him. He's healthy. So definitely him and definitely Rafaela. Those two guys have been big names in the minors for a while. And now I think it's their time to shine.
All right, write those down. Pay attention to them this year. I will definitely make a point to follow those two players in the minors this season. All right, let's wrap this all up. Let's put it together. Let's get your predictions, expectations for 2023. As of last year, as we mentioned at the beginning of this show, Lauren, 78 and 84, the Boston Red Sox was in the basement of the American League East. Let's look forward to the end of 2023. Where does the Red Sox sit once the final standings come out in the American League East? In 78.5 wins. Over under, are they better than last year?
So I'm taking the over because sports betting just became legal in Massachusetts, and I made my first bet on the Red Sox, and I took the over. So I am riding the over until game 162. So I'm gonna take the over, and there's a lot has to go right for this Red Sox team. I do think they'll be much more fun to watch this year, but I do think they're still about an 80 to 83 win team. Does that get them into the wild card? I don't know. I guess that depends on how else the rest of the season goes with the new form, with the new schedule, how much they still play the AL East a good amount. I don't think it's going to take away too much there, but I think that it's about an 80-83 win team. Maybe they can make a push toward the end. It's kind of like I feel like this is going to come down to game 162. I might have said that last year as well, but I'm just going to recycle that take because it's a safe take. But after last year, I'm like, I don't know, because last year I was so positive that this was going to be a postseason contending team. But I don't know if you watch Scrubs, but in season 3, Michael J. Fox says, expect the unexpected and you'll never be surprised. So that's how I'm going into 2023.
I love that. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining the Red Sox. Let's see if they have a good year. At least your Bruins are doing fantastic this year. At least they're having awesome. I know you do a lot on the Bruins as well. So Lauren, Willand, everyone, thank you for joining this show. Before you go, let everyone know where they can find your work, where they can find you on social media. The mic is yours.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. I'm glad that we could connect again. And you can find me on Twitter and pretty much any social media at Lauren, 3 Laws, Lauren with 4 R's. I co-host the Locked On Red Sox podcast Monday through Friday. Pretty much wherever you get your podcast is where you can find Locked On Red Sox. And then I also co-host a podcast called Snipe and Selly, just a roundup of hockey news, just for 4 friends having a lot of fun. So nothing too serious there, but if you like fun hockey talk, that's what we do. And of course, Nesson.com is where you can find all of my stuff. Lots of Red Sox content coming out between now and opening day. But like you mentioned, my focus is the Bruins right now, and tons of Bruins content there. Pretty much every single day, there's Bruins content coming from me and my coworkers as we get ready for what's hopefully going to be a long Stanley Cup run that's going to bleed into a strong 2023 Red Sox season.
Yeah, as for good reason, too. That trade deadline was great for the Bruins, so hopefully they can continue on for your sake. So all that stuff will also be in the episode description below, so check out Lauren's work. That's going to wrap it up for this episode here at the Route Report for the OK Baseball podcast. We'll be back. We have more team previews. We are getting closer to opening day now. We're getting almost 3 weeks away, everyone. It's fantastic. Cannot wait for it. But we'll be back here with another episode soon. Take care.